Hello, YouTube. This is going to be the first in a series of many videos where I dialogue about different topics of psychology and neuroscience and different things like that. The first topic is going to be something about schizophrenia. So first, let's start with this. What if schizophrenia is just individualization that becomes toxic? Introversion is a symptom of early schizophrenia, and this could be for many reasons. One of them could be that the person is fearfully retreating away from the world due to paranoid ideas, though I don't know if I would think that. What else it could be is that introversion itself can increase your chances of becoming psychotic, which I'll explain in a little bit. Introversion could lead to excessive personal development and introspection and extrospection. You could begin having a lot of time to think about everything that's going on with all the different things in your life, all the different things that you experience, and your conception of them will start to get much more complex than probably everyone else that you're surrounded by because you have more time than them. Eventually, it's obvious that a person's beliefs will develop beyond what is socially grounded and what is consensus reality. So now I'm going to talk about the main topic, which is grandiosity versus paranoia. If you actually think about it, it is a split perception about your own internal intelligence. If you're processing highly theoretical and abstract associative ideas such as conspiracy or anything similar, then you will face a problem when empathizing. When we empathize, we relate and assume that others are similar to us, but you may also assume differences and try to compensate for such. Now here is the two paths that you can choose when you're trying to empathize with the people you're surrounded by. We could assume that others are like us, and that they think theoretically, abstractly, deeply, too deeply, which would make it so that when you're looking at people, you will start to notice that they don't necessarily outwardly express complexity. They instead might come off as if they're hiding it. They might, for example, like you might be analyzing someone deeply, and then when they express their viewpoints of you, they might oversimplify it, and then it's either your choice to correct them and show them that you're thinking too complexly, but then probably in early childhood this would cause judgment and isolation, which is exactly how you would start introverting, which could lead to more psychosis, especially if other people's intentions don't seem good. Then of course you will start to have a bias where you start to assume that other people are not having good intentions, which is what leads to paranoia. You might start assuming that people are hiding their complexity for some kind of reason, for some hidden intention, that they're pretending or playing dumb in some sense, but not necessarily dumb in terms of memory or other things like that, which it could be, but instead it would be the thoroughness of someone. And the other option, as opposed to assuming that people are similar to us, is to assume that they are actually different. For them to be different, we might assume that they are truly simple as they seem, which would lead to the symptom of grandiosity, which is also seen in schizophrenia. Both of these come from a higher state of awareness, theoretically speaking. Paranoia assumes everyone is just as aware as you, and grandiosity assumes that they aren't. That there are no facades, no deception. Psychosis is when you forget that you are more aware than other people, and your assumptions kind of have a runaway effect. They start piling onto each other. Epiphanies become automatic. They become almost unconscious. Something else we know about schizophrenia is that it can be induced by mostly. We're not going to go into that actually. But something else we know is that optical illusions were found to not occur in people who are schizophrenic or also those under the influence of psychedelic substances. And with that, I think optical illusions are a reduction in awareness due to the repetition of exposure to something. For example, you see this corner right here. You are looking at a flat screen, but yet you kind of have an illusion of depth perception, even though it is most definitely just a flat screen. And so an optical illusion, it's known that this illusion, for example, doesn't occur in tribes where their living quarters are not in this shape. It is a learned illusion, and we already know that. And so, with the schizophrenic, they would not experience this illusion. Instead, they would likely experience it in depth perception and see it as it is. The experiment that they found this out with was called the rotating inverted mask illusion, where when the mask is turning, it sort of has the appearance that it's facing forward, even though it's actually concave. And schizophrenics, for some reason, do not see this. And what's interesting is that's actually, arguably, a better perception of reality. But I think that there are a lot of problems that come along with this kind of perception. For one, everyone else is seeing the world full of illusions, and that instantly means you can't relate to any of them, which would also enhance the introversion. But also, optical illusions can help us simplify everything and make it easier to understand the world around us, even if it is a fake understanding. But I think the way these optical illusions arise is from the repetition and exposure to the stimuli to the point that it sort of gets numbed out and replaced with a memory object of sorts, which I think is in the temporal lobe. I think the temporal lobe stores familiar patterns of sensory stimuli that we can recall based on cues. For example, we can just take these lines and ignore most other detail and fill in the blank with a perception that it is three-dimensional. And so most of our experience of life is completely not three-dimensional as an adult. And I think that having this kind of perception, though, can mean that you not only see the world more complex in a lot of details, but you also it would obviously change the way you think about what you're seeing, because you wouldn't be able to reduce things as much. And I don't know what you would consider as a familiar. I don't know how to get into that actually, but I think you can kind of get where this is going. Let's see. I think stuff like conspiracy kind of arises from this, because you're able to see when you see this, something like this in its full detail, you're able to correlate patterns and details that other people have shut out, and because of their simplifications, they would shut out most of the detail and probably experience this as just a group of lines or something like that, and objects or whatever it is that you're looking at will be simplified into however you define it. And I think that the schizophrenics likely would see all the associative traits that an object has in a non-simplified way, so that they can relate this to other objects with the same traits, and this would cause you to get carried away really quickly. You would start to think that you understand a lot more, and you might, but the problem is you don't. If it's a person that doesn't check themselves or critically analyze, then they can get caught up in a lot of delusions, essentially. And because the rest of the world is based on people who might be, well, actually, I don't know if I would argue this, but for the most part, you're surrounded by people who think in a much more simplistic way, in a more possibly general way. You wouldn't really have anyone else to kind of slow you down or tell you that you're wrong. And you'd probably, if you're in this state of mind, you'd probably easily pick up on other people's seeming simplicity, like with the grandiosity, in a way that you'd sort of not trust their judgments and their perceptions. Like, what if you were able to figure out that everyone else is seeing a world of illusions and that you aren't? Why would you trust those people at all? And then that could lead to paranoia on its own as well. They might be able to notice differences in all the people rather than assume everyone is mostly similar, which is something I think might be a normal perception. Maybe not, and that doesn't matter. But you might assume that there's people smarter than you, which everyone would. But if the schizophrenic is assuming people are thinking more complex than they are, then they would be worried about the kind of power that that person can have, especially politically, and that would give rise to things like conspiracy theory. And I think once the isolation sets in and all of the emotions and all the different things going on, and probably it overworks working memory in the frontal lobe and a lot of things, you'd probably just slowly have cognitive dysfunctions from that point. You'd probably give up, especially if you can't relate to anyone around you, and then I think the amount of mental decay would just slowly escalate until you're non-functional, or probably like the disorganized schizophrenics. Um, well, this is basically it for now. I'm gonna stop this because I'm running out of ideas and I don't have anything else. Thanks for watching, and these videos are gonna get better as I go. This is just a test, really, until I make probably a different channel.